Let's take a minute and think about how chlorophyll pigment functions during photosynthesis. We've said that light acts as both a wave and a particle called a photon, and we know that light has energy associated with it. When light is absorbed by a pigment molecule like chlorophyll, the electrons that are in the chlorophyll are going to become energized by that light. In physics, we describe electrons as being capable of moving between certain states of excitation. When the electrons in chlorophyll are energized by the light, they move to a higher state of excitation. The photon strikes the chlorophyll molecule, and the energy in the light gets transferred to an electron in the pigment. The electron then jumps up in excitation. In other words, it gets raised into a higher shell with a higher potential energy. Because remember, electrons are the conduits of the movement of energy or the flow of energy in a living cell. Now, an important thing to remember about these states of excitation for electrons is that they're discrete. In other words, there's a ground state, then there's a state of higher excitation, higher energy, that we refer to as level 1, and then you can advance beyond that to the next discrete level of excitation, level 2. But you can't go in between those discrete levels. In other words, the electron can go from the 0 level up to 1, but it cannot go to a half or 3/4. If it can't make it up to the 1 level, it will fall back down to 0. These are discrete levels. They are incremental, not continuous. 0 to 1 to 2. It turns out that the red photons inside sunlight have enough energy in them to excite the electrons in chlorophyll to that number 1 level, whereas the photons in blue are able to excite the electrons even more up to the number 2 level. So when a photon of light is absorbed, the electron gets excited to that next energy state, if you will. So the change in energy that it takes for an electron to rise from the 0 level to the 1 level is, again, the energy that you would find in a red spectrum photon. And remember, red light has a wavelength of approximately 700 nanometers in that area. The change in energy level to go from level 1 to level 2 is the energy that would be found in a blue photon. And remember, blue light is down in the area of about 400 nanometers. Chlorophyll, if you remember, can absorb both red and blue light, both red and blue photons, and so we get the maximum excitation of the electrons as possible. Now I want to mention briefly a phenomenon called fluorescence, because this drives home the idea that the excitation states for electrons in chlorophyll are discrete and not continuous. In the drawing, you can see on the left-hand side a spectrum of energy of an electron in chlorophyll. This is the lower end and then the higher end. What you're looking at on the right is a depiction in green of a chlorophyll molecule. Looks a little bit like a puzzle piece, but it represents a molecule of the chlorophyll pigment. and they're showing us an electron in that pigment molecule. In order for that electron to go from the 0 state, the resting state, up to that number 1 state, it has to absorb enough energy from a photon of light. If it doesn't, what'll happen is the photon will hit the electron, energy will be transferred to the electron will increase in energy, but it won't get it all the way to the next discrete level. And so the electron will fall back down to that 0 resting level. Now, since it did absorb energy before it fell back down, something has to happen to that energy. And what happens is fluorescence. The fluorescent phenomenon shows us that unless enough energy is transferred to that electron, it cannot reach the excited state that it needs to drive photosynthesis. The other thing we need to know about chlorophyll is that this pigment works in groups of molecules. In a thylakoid membrane, there are anywhere from 200 to 300 individual chlorophyll molecules and accessory pigment molecules that get grouped together in arrays that are called photosystems. So all a photosystem is a group of chlorophyll molecules. Again, somewhere between 200 and 300. The photosystem, the group of chlorophylls, has two major components to it. It has what is referred to as the antenna complex and the reaction center. In other words, the chlorophyll is arranged in that big group into two different functional groups, the antenna complex and the reaction center. Let's talk about the antenna complex first. When photons strike the chlorophyll in the antenna complex, and remember, we're going to focus on red and blue photons here, the energy from the light will be absorbed, and the electrons in the chlorophyll molecules will be excited from the 0 state to the 1 and then to the 2. That energy will then be passed from that chlorophyll molecule to a nearby chlorophyll molecule. Note that this is a passing of the energy of the electron, not the electron itself. So this is not an oxidation reduction of this chlorophyll. This is simply a passing of the energy from the electron. So in the diagram over here on the right, you can see a photon coming in and impacting one of these green chlorophyll molecules. And we can see the electron depicted here that is going to be excited by the energy in the photon. The energy from that excited electron is then going to be passed to another chlorophyll molecule. And that chlorophyll molecule will absorb that energy. Its electron will get excited and then will pass that energy to the next chlorophyll molecule, and so on and so on. In other words, the energy is bouncing between pigment molecules in the antenna complex. This is a phenomenon called resonance. So in fluorescence, when an electron absorbs light energy, but it's not enough to raise it up to the next discrete level of excitation, that energy stays with that molecule of chlorophyll. But in resonance, because the electron is excited to the next and the next discrete levels of energy, the energy can leave that chlorophyll and go to the next chlorophyll molecule, and then to the next and to the next. This is resonance, and it takes place in the antenna complex. Now, if you go back to the diagram, you can see that this chlorophyll molecule right here has had its electron excited, and the energy is then being passed to this chlorophyll molecule, which is a slightly darker green color. They're trying to show us that this molecule is going to have a different job to do than the other chlorophyll pigment molecules in the antenna complex. This chlorophyll molecule is in the reaction center. A couple of things to note about the antenna complex. Once energy gets transmitted from one chlorophyll molecule to another, the excited electron in that first chlorophyll molecule falls back down to ground state, to that zero state. The energy is transmitted to the next chlorophyll molecule inside the antenna complex. The antenna complex got its name because it functions similarly to a radio antenna, in that it's receiving signal and passing it along. It's receiving signal in the form of sunlight energy, and it's passing it along not to a radio receiver, but to the reaction center. The reaction center is a different region within the photosystem. It's a group of chlorophyll molecules that just have a different function to do with regards to the light-dependent reactions. When the energy from the antenna complex hits a chlorophyll molecule in the reaction center, we're going to see that light energy, that electron energy, get transformed. Remember, a cell cannot create energy, it can't destroy energy. All it can do is transform it, take it from one form and put it into another form. So the excited electrons in the antenna complex are having their energy harvested and transferred from molecule to molecule to molecule in the antenna complex. But when that energy reaches the reaction center, now instead of being used to excite another electron, it's going to be transferred to an electron acceptor molecule. The electron acceptor, in taking the excited electron, is going to become reduced, and the chlorophyll pigment will then be oxidized. The energy transformation event that occurs here started with the sun. Light that was coming from the sun was absorbed by the pigment molecule, and it was transmitted to the electrons in the pigment molecule, and it excited those electrons up to higher discrete states of energy. As those electrons fell back down to ground state, staying with their pigment molecule, their energy was transferred from pigment molecule to pigment molecule to pigment molecule across the antenna complex. When that energy got to the reaction center and an electron was excited in the reaction center, something different happened. The electron was transferred to an electron acceptor. That electron acceptor then became reduced, and the chlorophyll molecule where the electron originated became oxidized. On this slide, we can see some of the images we've seen before. We can see the fluorescence image. We can see the resonance image. And now we can see an oxidation reduction event occurring. So let's go through these again. On the left-hand side, we see a chlorophyll molecule that's absorbing a photon. The electron within the chlorophyll molecule is being excited to a higher energy state, but it's not enough to get that energy state up from ground to the level 1 or the level 2. So the electron falls back down to ground state and it emits whatever energy it was able to absorb. It emits it in the form of fluorescence and in the form of heat. Over here, we see another chlorophyll molecule getting hit with a photon, absorbing the energy in that photon. But this time, its electron was excited up to those discrete levels of 1 and 2. Now, the energy from that excited electron will be sent along to the next chlorophyll molecule, and its electron will get excited, and then we'll pass it to the next, and then the next, and then the next, until finally the energy is passed along to the reaction center. All the reaction center is chlorophyll. It's a molecule of chlorophyll that, just like all the other molecules, will have its electron get excited. But this time, instead of just sending along the energy, this time the electron itself will be transferred. It will get transferred to an electron acceptor molecule. That means that the reaction center chlorophyll has lost an electron. All these other chlorophylls in the antenna complex, they still have their electrons. The electron went up in energy and then transferred that energy and then came back down to ground state. But in the reaction center, the electron itself is going to be transferred, not just its energy. It will be lost by the chlorophyll molecule and gained by an electron acceptor molecule. So the chlorophyll gets oxidized, the acceptor molecule gets reduced. Remember, all a photosystem is a collection of chlorophyll pigment molecules. And it's a collection of chlorophyll that absorbs light in particular wavelengths for the purpose of gathering energy from electrons that reside in those chlorophyll molecules. Inside a photosynthetic organism, inside thylakoid membrane, for example, there are two different types of photosystems. And as we'll see in the next video, these photosystems are linked. We're going to call them photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. But I want you to remember that photosystem 2 is going to function first in regards to the process of photosynthesis. Photosystem 2 will function first, followed by photosystem 1.